Welcome to Transcendent Psychotherapist. This is part 2 of the interview I did with Heather Hamilton on her book Returning to Eden. If you've not seen part 1 yet, I would highly recommend you start there. There's some great parts though in part 2, so definitely recommend watching the whole thing, especially actually towards the end. So hang in there and thanks for watching.
So that's the very interesting part of it for me is it's not, I don't have a cynical view of Jesus, it's not, that never happened, I don't believe it, anything like that. It's like, no, whatever this presence is, Christ, I think has been showing up since the beginning of time in different archetypes, in different people that mean different things to different people. I was actually having a conversation with someone who was quite literally a literalist, and she was having a really difficult time with me um opening up the concept of like the way, the truth, and the life. It was like, no, Jesus said that he was, so that's it, the end of the conversation. And I'm a little more open, like, well, what is that? What exactly does that mean when he says that, And we talked about this idea of grandmothers, where to me, my grandmother was the embodiment of this, this vessel of Christ's maternal love. When I think about, oh, I'm yearning for a motherly love, she is who would come to mind for me. I have this relationship with her. So when I say, I love my grandmother and she's the best, that is very true for me. You, however, probably wouldn't feel that way about my grandma, but you might have a grandma where you can say, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about." So it's not the specific person. It's not my grandma has to be your grandma. It's this, these different people in our lives embody these different archetypes that are universally true for everybody. So, anyways, that's a kind of how I see Jesus, where, for me, he is the equivalent of, how I feel about my grandma. Like he represents something, a facet of the divine to me that penetrates me very deeply. And I don't feel like I have to reject that. I feel like I can, you know, utilize it in a way that's therapeutic and healing and comforting for me. And also, I understand why, someone who's Muslim or something wouldn't feel that way about Jesus, but might feel that way about Allah or Muhammad or somebody else, some other figure that they've, had these exact same experiences with that I've had, with Jesus. So I'm kind of
Yeah.
rambling. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. And I'm wondering, because I think you talk about some of Richard Rohr's ideas on Christ, don't you, in the book as well? And I guess I just remembering the chapter you wrote, talking about sort of a chapter on Christ, wasn't there? And you kind of talk about him as the logos and the word. And what was it? The cosmos as Christ's body. So that so in this sense, it almost, I guess, to come back to the archetypal or stay with the archetypal thing, it almost for me pulling it together, it's almost kind of like, well, in the Greeks kind of saw the logos as the kind of rational ordering principle of the cosmos, didn't they? So I'm wondering if that's kind of, in your way of thinking, kind of like that might manifest and look different to people in different ways at different times, but that we're still encountering the same principle or the same energy. But in all cases, I suppose the Christ archetype, certainly for Jung, would be, it's kind of like this incarnating divine man theme, isn't it? This how I'm waffling, I'm getting this badly wrong, but yeah,
No, I'm tracking with you.
yeah, it's that kind of, I guess the central thing of the Christ figure is this. What you talk about is, this. If we're going to try and understand God, then God is like Jesus. So that there's a paragraph in your books in there. What do we do with the passages in the Old Testament where you've got the Canaanite genocides? Is God like that, or do we see God in the person of Jesus? And or Christ? So that's it's kind of a bit amorphous and a bit undefined there a bit, but maybe for me, in the way I'm putting it.
But I like what you're pointing out though about the principle of Christ being this reordering of the universe, or to put it like it is the order of the universe, but for our rational minds, it has to be reordered, reestablished, because we're going to fall asleep and, our minds are going to distort it. So to your point, I think that ordering principle has been here since the beginning of time. We can place the historical Jesus on a timeline, but yeah, to your point, what about before him? Did people have access to this ordering principle before him? And my thought is yes. And we see it in different mythologies. Jesus, the symbol of Jesus is probably the most powerful one for me. Even, the symbol of the cross, the idea that everything on the physical, horizontal, earthly plane intersects with like the spiritual, heavenly plane. And then we see in Jesus that realization happens at the center of the human heart. So it's this spiritual awakening to our own humanity and divinity, and these higher capacities for compassion, love, truth, beauty. And we awaken from our animalistic nature, which is mostly driven, by the mind, which is kind of just focused on like reproduction or survival or competition, those kind of things. So when those animalistic impulses are what's driving our whole consciousness and our societies, then we end up with a lot of disordered violence, right?
Yeah.
And it's might makes right, and that makes sense in that world, but at the center, go ahead.
No, I was thinking this might link really nicely to bring a few of the themes together, because because Jung talks about the first half of life, and you refer to this in the false and true self as well. I think so. That very often our concern is to understand our position in the order of society and to create the persona, to adapt us, which is not necessarily just a false in the negative sense or unuseful sense. It's so you need it. You need to find your position and to take your seat in the amongst the elders of the society.
Yes.
Your place in the tribe. You've got to grow up and perform your functions. But then talking about the second half of life is kind of being able to remove that mask to some degree and to allow, he calls it the self, by which he means God. The deepest level of the human being is divine. There's that famous interview with Jung, some BBC journalist saying to him, do you believe in God? He said, I don't believe in, I don't did the accent right, I don't believe in God. I know it's true, but he's kind of like, basically the deep self. And I'm a big fan of Rupert Spira, and you refer to Rupert Spira in the book as well, but that deep sense of just that pure consciousness beyond which you cannot go further back, just pure knowing, pure being, pure I am, is at the very center of what humans are. So so I'm wondering, is that the journey that we go from this kind of animalist development, where we get the competition and the survival, reproduction, all those things, and that's the concern just of the first half of life, and that people can't, I don't know, can't be spiritual, but they often just don't have the dynamic to fulfill what they need to become and to get in touch with that deeper true self until the second half of life. But I think I'll let you carry on from here, because you kind of touch on this with your seed analogy, don't you?
Yeah.
True and full self.
Yeah. So there's like you just said, I use this metaphor of a seed. Actually, I have one right here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like when we think of a seed, we just think of the outside of it, something that you could hold in your hand. But the actual germinating potential of this seed is the embryo that's inside. So the embryo is what first grows on the tree, which in the garden, this would represent our source of life or God. So there's this embryo that is literally a part of the tree. It's one with God. But in order to self actualize and fulfill its own destiny, this shell, which would represent the false self or the egoic personality, has to form around the embryo and then fall from the tree. So in the book, I hope there's this redemption of the myth, where we've learned of, the fall and eating of the fruit and all of this is like a moral failure. When in psychological terms, it's absolutely essential that this happen. For the individual to self-actualize. So it's the false self or the egoic personality that gets us through the first half of life, gets us as a vehicle. And I don't just say that lightly. It's very much, if this were not to have happen, then the embryo would just completely be washed out by the elements of nature. It's brutal. So you have to have this sturdy shell. But then, of course, as we know, if this would like to become a tree, it eventually has to be buried in the ground, and everything we identify as that's associated with that outer shell has to crack open and die. So it's this letting go of all these identities that we've attached to ourselves that tell us who we are. So I'm a mom, I'm a Christian, I'm a woman. I've attached all these things to give myself an identity. Suddenly, that's all falling away. I see it as temporary, something that's just gonna become a part of the dust. And then what's left, that's
Mm.
that's the point at which you encounter the the mystical experience of oneness, oneness with the source. Suddenly I'm I'm one with the soil. I'm putting roots, that are attaching to other trees, and I'm growing up out of the ground, and I'm sprouting new life that's also a part of me. And so it's like this sudden awareness of your collective oneness, where you realize, oh, I'm at home. I was never separated from anything. It was just this perception of separation, but you understand the necessity for all the steps of the process for a person to get to the point in their life where the true self or the embryo is now blossoming and informing all the roles that we had that previously were my identity, like I'm a mom, this is my identity. Now it's more I am I I am this essence, this essential quality that is animating this role as mother, So
Yeah.
there's not this clinging in this specific example. There's not this clinging to my children to give me an identity. You see this a lot with parents where there is love there for children, but it's also such a source of identity that it can become, narcissistic, or it can impede the development of the children because it's now like the children have to be an extension of your identity, So
Yeah.
you act narcissistic, like they can't have their own identity, or, for the smothering parent or whatever, it's like, I can't let you go. I can't let you grow up, because if you're gone, then what am I? You don't need me anymore, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, if we don't have this crucifixion of the false self experience, then we start clinging to this shell, and that's when it becomes like this inverted source of destruction where, everything starts to wither.
And it's important. I mean, this is where it's like the really rich stuff, isn't it? You think of these metaphors within Christianity, for example, that if you just stay with kind of surface readings, you miss out on all of that. But I'm just also wondering, like, how can I think of it? Like, God, if you like, let's say the source, the creator, what have you, could just go straight from I am to I am. It could just be, it's like, why the whole seed thing? Why the whole? We could get into that, and we don't need to try and answer it necessarily. But I'm just curious as well, because, and I mean, this is a question to myself more than to you necessarily. It's just thinking out loud. Sometimes spiritual traditions kind of negate that first half of life. We might be in danger of, well, why can't we just skip all that kind of messy stuff, that really awkward, painful stuff, and just go straight to and all that really matters is then the spiritual end goal of, realizing our oneness with the one and the source. But it doesn't seem to be what's going on, does it? Because I mean, in a sense, there seems to be, because that wouldn't make sense. It would just be like, well, why the whole circuitous route? You could just, And I'm wondering, just in that sort of Trinitarian sense, maybe this makes more sense of what's going on or something like it anyway, where you're not just transcending, but the immanent life that you live in the real world is important for being this particular instantiation of the I am, or this particular, I don't know, that it's not wasted. It's not just about bringing you about as an individual I am that can go, I am like the I am, because you could have just got there from the beginning, perhaps. There's something unique or of character that is worth building and developing and keeping hold of, nurturing, that also finds its oneness with the I am, place within the I am, but in a non-attached way, or at least in a way that it's attached to its original source more than to all the peripheral things that kind of came along the way. I don't know if I'm making sense there at all, Heather, but
yeah. Well, I think you're trying to describe the beauty of development, and I think what's interesting is when, you do have an experience of that oneness or whatnot, you realize, oh, this isn't just true for right now. This has always been, this, even in this state, the state of the seed or the false self, I'm still at one with everything. I'm at one with life and one with the process. It's more just the mental awareness of realizing it. So once you do realize it, I can look at my children right now and go, I think what we try to do is, like, on one hand, well, what's the point of all this? Like, y'all just grow up already and realize you're one with everything, and, no need for all the silly childhood suffering and all of this. But I can look at them, as someone who is more mature with more perspective, and see the beauty of their whole developmental process, and nurture it and cherish it and love it and watch it bloom. And when they do lose themselves and they suffer and they go through all this, unnecessary mechanical suffering, it just cultivates like more compassion in my heart, for the whole human situation, but having this awareness, it makes it a little easier, I guess, to not add like more shame to the fact that they're going to mess up, make mistakes, and all of this. And then when we go on our own journeys, towards the end, there's the parable of the prodigal son, where, you have the juxtaposition of the two brothers, where they're both, quote unquote, in heaven with the father. They're already there. And then the prodigal son who leaves, makes a mess of everything and comes back. He takes the whole circular journey to get back to where he started. And so once again, they're both back at home with the father. But this older brother, he's in hell because he doesn't know it. So they're in the same place. It's all just a matter of perspective and that wisdom that you collect.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. To answer your question, I don't know why it is this way. All I know is that it is this way. And so I think there's some freedom in affirming that there is something necessary and good about this circular journey where we end up back in the same place, but it's a matter of perspective. There's gratitude and appreciation, and there's life flowing from the prodigal, and there's cynicism and resentment here, although this brother clearly has access to everything. There's no difference other than the perspective.
And there's obviously a clear difference in the prodigal son and, say, Jesus as coming from his father and leaving home, if you like, sort of, and returning. There's this, it's not entirely parallel story, but there's a certain echo in that as well, isn't there? The son that goes away but returns, but is always with the father. But I'm just thinking of that as a kind of archetype for all of our journeys, in the sense that we all, perhaps in a sense, come out of God, but what's that T.S. Eliot quote, isn't it? That, I'm not going to get it right. It's something like that we will go and come back to the place where we began, but recognize it for the first time, or something like that. It's only somehow in leaving and changing that whole perspective and returning again that we really see it. And maybe some people talk about, I know Rupert Spira talks about that in us as finite versions of the infinite mind, that somehow in us, and Bernardo Kastrup talks a bit about this as well, and other kind of philosophers, they've too had chats, that that the infinite kind of can't know itself directly, but in the finite mind there's a kind of finite knowing of itself in some kind of way. These analogies are always very poor.
But what you're saying as well about the circle, I mean, Jung talks about, I think that he says, the symbol of the circle is a symbol of completion. So it's like, I'm not exactly sure how he says it, but one of the most complete or highest spiritual symbols or whatever. Anyways, and he was very drawn to like the mandala, which is a very Eastern, we really don't come across that a lot in our Western culture. So that's the interesting part to me with, Christianity being my mother tongue, the language that I speak the most fluently. I can interpret and find deep, rich meaning in the symbols because they're so embedded in me. But it's interesting, to hear Jung talk about his experience of self-realization through, mandalas. It's like, I've not connected in that way with that symbol as much, but I absolutely understand why, the whole other side of the world has. So it's interesting to me where I kind of see it as like, oh, maybe I'm speaking English over here and that's Spanish over there. And I can kind of have a humility about it where I'm like, I'm sure all of this is in your language. I just, I can't connect all the dots because I don't speak that language as fluently.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking as well, I'd love to come onto the cross, if that's all right, Heather, as well. because obviously, you know, Christians, particularly today, particularly sort of in conservative circles, but also a lot of people that have no Christianity, if you like, but that's the Christianity they come across, let's say. So skeptics, for example, and so one of my best friends is a skeptic, and one of the things you see is this kind of almost absurd understanding on both parts of like the atonement of the cross of Christ. You know that it, you know, the dominant view being that it's the place where God is taking out his wrath or anger on humanity or human sin. And it's funny because I was just watching this video the other day, Richard Rohr talking to Father Thomas Keating, and you know he says, what was it, you know, how we get this whole thing back to front, really, that we think the blood of Jesus was, you know, about God changing his mind about us, like trying to forgive us through having to punish and, you know, torture his son on a cross. Where he says, you know, the blood of Jesus was not to change God's mind about us, but to change our mind about God. What do you make of the kind of the cross and this whole, because it's absolutely central to Christian identity in some form, isn't it? Whatever form, I guess. It's a central Christian symbol, and you talk about it in the book as well. So I'm wondering, kind of like, you know, how do you, can you explain to us kind of how you see the cross, and where do we get it wrong?
Yeah, I see it on a few different levels now. One I already touched on, just as about like a grounding universal symbol for the the intersection of the divine and the material world being everywhere. So like that cruciform pattern is something that I see in all of matter. So it's a very grounding symbol for me in terms of feeling at home in my body and in the universe. Um, that that cruciform symbol does that for me. And symbols, psychologically, they can bring us to a place much faster than we can get to verbally. You know, just when I think about a cross, boom, I'm there, as opposed to having someone explain it to me, or, you know, I've already taken a minute to explain it right now. Um, so I think that they're absolutely essential for the psyche, which Jung would say the same thing. You know, the return to wisdom is a return to the symbols. And this is from someone, you know, Jung, who grew up Roman Catholic and then, you know, completely left it in sort of the same way. You know, I think he had this vision of like like a giant, excuse me, but like a giant turd falling from the
Oh yeah.
sky on top of the Roman Catholic Church. Like that was like his I'm done with this moment, you know. So he totally walks away, and then kind of by the end returns with this new understanding of the symbols. Um, so there's that, and then there's also the the psychological process that I feel I've experienced, and what I think that Jesus is pointing to, and it's what do we do with our pain and suffering, and um, you know, the psychological need that we have as humans to avoid pain and to project it onto other people, and you know, the cycle of violence that causes. And so, you know, we see that cycle of violence played out in Jesus, and specifically we project our pain onto um you know, our shadow, things that we don't want to see. So, you know, kind of going back to the beginning where we talked about like the human capacity for violence and cruelty and this shadow side that we have, like, you know, I don't want to admit to myself that I'm capable of horrendous acts of violence, you
Mm.
know, that, ooh, like even I don't want to tag myself as that, you know, in my that threatens my societal tribal attachments and all of this. So when we see that kind of behavior in our society, it's like, let's relegate those people like to the farthest off prisons and, you know, project everything we don't want to see about ourselves onto them. And it's like, those are those people, you know, we've created an other. So going back to the conversation about everyone that we consider an other is really some part of ourselves that we've projected onto them and we would like to not acknowledge. So anyways, to me, the cross has to do with what do we do with our pain? So, you know, in Jesus hanging there, Brian Zahn does a really a really great explanation of this. So I'm borrowing a little bit from him, but it's like we project all of our pain into Jesus, and then instead of, you know, projecting it back onto us or onto other people and continuing the cycle of violence, he takes all that energy, and we can, when we do this, we can recognize the pain as energy. We call it pain, but it's really just energy. So we take all this energy into us and kind of alchemize it into our body and recycle it and put it back out as love. And so the intensity of love and compassion that you feel coming off of Jesus is really like almost the equivalent to the pain that's been projected into him. So instead of just trying to be like, get this off of me because this is so intense, which when you really kind of hang on your cross and sit with the psychological pain that you've endured, you know, from family or society or whatever, like it's very intense. You know, this is why we have therapists, is because it's almost too much for an individual to hold. Like there has to be like a space and a grounding presence, you know, to not completely overwhelm the psyche. But being able to bear it, if you can consent to it, then it's almost something of a mystical alchemy that happens where you become like this being of light and love and compassion, where and you can see, like I love this about Jesus, the Father, forgive them for they don't know what they're doing. He's like, I can see that you're projecting your pain. So I don't even think that he sees the people who are crucifying him as quote unquote oppressors. I think he sees them as people who are in an extreme amount of pain, you know? So he's still able to see them as like his brothers and sisters, or part of the one who is still, you know, trapped in this orientation to pain that produces violence. So it's almost as being able to like have the experience of pain without without connecting it so much to the source where it's coming from. You know, you understand that it's an unconscious projection that's going on.
Yeah, it's almost, I've got this image of almost like earthing electric power, you know, on the cross, if like earthing it back to source, you know, and then kind of, yeah. But you that was very powerful what you just said in terms of, I was just thinking of examples of it in human history as well, where people have lived it. You know, what's his name? You know, in South Africa with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, and
are you talking about Nelson Mandela?
Yeah, and Desmond Tutu, and
Okay.
yeah, but just that sort of, you talking about there. I was thinking like the sort of person who can take in other people's pain and feel it and kind of convert it within themselves through that understanding, through that model as well, using that in their mind to some degree, kind of converting that into love back out again to people, break that cycle of violence, break the cycle of ongoing trauma, and take not only does it sort of just neutralize it, but it has the potential to what's the word, to benefit as well. So you change.
Yeah.
You don't just go from the darkness of your pain, if you like, to grey.
Yes.
you it's converted to, what's the word? It's almost like kind of like throw a ball against a wall. It doesn't just stop at the wall. It bounces, that energy bounces back into the opposite direction. So it seems exactly the sort of thing Jesus seems to be teaching as well, isn't it? In terms of the Gospels, love those. Don't just love those that love you back.
Yeah.
Love your enemies.
Yeah, and that energy, a lot of times could be like the catalyst for the breaking open of the false self, and then you understand, and this is a very personal thing, so I'll just speak for myself. But I wouldn't change anything about my past or anything that happened to me that was unjust or all of those things brought me to the point of this happening. It's like all of that pain, was the catalyst for my awakening. And once you understand, like, oh, this is the pattern, you can look around and go, a lot of people don't start to wake up until they're dying. It might be this, resistance to death or whatever, like on their deathbed, and the shell doesn't start to crack until then. And so if this awakening happens before then you kind of have gratitude for the whole journey, So you can, it's just for me, it's been this perspective of like, oh, I even think to myself, in the process of forgiveness and all this, like in terms of what does it mean to follow Jesus? Well, not just his life, but, in this kind of mythology that we have, it's we're to believe that Jesus, before he even incarnated unto earth, like said yes to all of this. Like looked at his whole life. Okay, you're gonna, be born of this woman, live this crazy life as a child, and then you're gonna get nailed to the cross and die when you're 33. Do you consent to this? Yes. And so that, taking it all the way back to there, was a huge catalyst for forgiveness and self-responsibility for me. Like really being responsible for your own incarnation was just me imagining, oh, what if in this life I want to learn like the highest capacity for love, forgiveness, compassion, all my potential as a person. What circumstances would awaken me to that? And I look at my life and I'm like, my exact life, would awaken me to this. So for me, it's been helpful. Not in terms of going like, oh, that was okay, or it's not like a moral judgment kind of thing. It just is, this is what happened. This is where it got me. And, my attitude is, or my perspective on it is, I have control of my attitude. I can be a person of gratitude and appreciate beauty and truth and cultivate those things within me. And, or I can be resentful about what happened. And live out of that place. So at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to, yeah.
And it's highly speculative, but I kind of wonder, in some sense, whether that story of consenting to life beforehand, in some sense, is something we all do.
Yeah.
In some level, but if we all are, if you like, original consciousness, our individuated expressions. There's a great little story. Oh, I'd have to find this clip. I might add it on if it's of any use to what we're talking about here. But it really made me think. It was of this person, and they went through this life, and then there was this other person went through this terrible life and these other things. This other person had this kind of great life, these other things. But only at the end of this thing do you realize it's actually they're saying it was all the same person. Multiple lives. It was all one person. It was just one I am.
Yeah.
Going through these not infinite, but almost infinite number of lives and perspectives and interactions, and having to love one another and to give up things voluntarily, but yeah, I mean, it's highly speculative. We
Yeah.
don't
Well, and
know.
that's the interesting thing is it's all very speculative, you know?
Mm,
I
mm,
just find some stories or potential possibilities more helpful than other ones, you know? Where it's like, could I tell you for sure that that's what happened before I was born? No, you
yeah,
know?
no,
But does that narrative help me to live a more productive, less cynical, more beautiful and open life? Yes, it
yeah,
does.
because effectively, in a sense, I can look at that and think, well, you are me living another life. I
Yes.
am you living another life. I'm kind of
Mhm.
talking to myself here. It's been great.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, in a sense that I know that we'll stop in a minute because I know we're going on a long time. But just there's that draws into that kind of collective unconscious, doesn't it? So you've
Mhm.
got that collective humanity, and underneath that, maybe even the deeper self of the ultimate I am. That this is the journey. This is what's kind of unfolding and going on and flowering here potentially.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
speculating, but yeah, it does make some sense to me.
Mhm. Yeah.
At some level, it doesn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but
Yeah.
it's something beautiful about it.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
and something I think that helped me move from, um, skepticism and sort of nihilism, I guess, was so yeah, I think when you're deconstructing, especially from like a highly fundamentalist religion, I personally did get to the point where it was like, I don't know, I can't say for sure about anything, you know? And it was almost this like it caused a bit of paralysis because well,
Mm.
I don't know for sure. So I don't know to go this way. I'm not sure if I should live my life this way. You know, I don't know if I'm just signing up for more rules by continuing to engage with Christianity in any way. Am I giving up my agency? You know, it's all this ambivalence. I got to a very ambivalent place. And then I actually read a book, The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich. Have you read that book?
No, no.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's very academic. Some of it is a little hard to follow, but he's like a Lutheran minister who basically affirms what I was experiencing, where he kind of goes, any honest inquiry of faith is most likely going to lead you to a place of atheism. Like you're going to study the sciences, you're going to get to that place. And so I felt, you know, okay, like kind of this relief, like here's this guy who's telling me that the place I'm in is normal. He said, but faith really starts when you put yourself on the map. It's not just you analyzing the map, you know, it's not just standing back and trying to order the universe and figure things out and what makes sense and all of this. At some point, that becomes a very flat endeavor, you know, where you have science, but there's still a lot of uncertainties and there's a lot of, you know, contradiction. And you kind of look at it all and you're like, does it mean anything? Maybe not, you know? So the faith journey is really when you turn back and you look at yourself and you put yourself on the map, you know? What do I love? What lights me up? Like, what ideas do I find a lot of beauty in? And that was really a game changer for me, to realize that I am a part of this. So the things that I feel or the ideas that I find beautiful or helpful or the philosophies that make my body feel more at ease and healthy and more alive are real. You know, that's a real data point for me. So it's kind of this idea of aligning, as Joseph Campbell would say, like aligning your nature with nature and then actually putting yourself on the map or to think of like the universe as a symphony or something, like, and finding your note that you're actually going to play in the symphony of things. And there's something, even at a very like physical cellular level, in my experience, that's just saying like yes, yes, yes when I'm living out of that place. So, anyways, to your point about like, you know, being a skeptic or it's all speculative and all of this, I'm like, yes, I would agree to that. But certain things, when I'm actually l- living out my incarnation, they make me feel really good. So I'm going to keep doing that.
And it's funny because I shared with you the other day, didn't I? That bizarre experience I had because I thought, right, I'm gonna bottom out my faith view, but if
Mhm.
I'm gonna get all the different books and kind of, I've got the different kind of the scholars and whatnot, kind of go to the historical Jesus and kind of, bottom out what I can know for certain, and
Mhm.
all these things. Read my friend's book, who's written a book on a similar thing, the resurrection, etc., etc., etc. Kind of really, for once in my life, kind of bottom out this Christian faith stuff and kind of, what's true, what's not true. And then I thought, I'm going to draw on all the resources. I'm not just going to draw on the books and the scholars and stuff like that. I'm also going to draw in the meditative practice, which I
Mhm.
thought, oh, okay, why not? So I sit down to do this meditation, and I find myself, and it was my imagination, but haven't been able to reconstruct something similar since. So it felt kind of a revelation as well, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Not
Mhm.
that the two are antithetical to each other, but kind of, I guess, what you'd call active imagination in Jungian terms. But so I was sat there, and then I was on this path in the forest. It was kind of
Mhm.
twilight, kind of dusky, dark, and there was a path going off uphill towards the light. And then I looked. There's another path going off downhill towards a kind of dark path.
Mhm.
And I kind of, in my meditation, I look, and Christ is down that path.
Mhm.
Well, you'd think it would be the other one, wouldn't you? You'd
Mhm.
think it would be the light path. Anyway,
Mhm.
so he says, "Come." So I walk down the path, and he climbs into this hole in the ground, and I follow in through the hole, kind of a bit,
Mhm.
nervous, like what's going on here.
Mhm.
And then down through this hole inside, there's this whole huge basilica, kind of cathedral.
Mhm.
And then at the back of the cathedral, there's an altar with a cross on, and I zoom in, and this is where this happened before I read this bit of your book, which is
Mhm.
bizarre. I zoom in, and I zoom into Christ on the cross, and then suddenly I am him,
Mhm.
and I'm looking out from his heart
Mhm.
on the world. And then there's a section in your book. I'll read this as we close off, where you write, Jesus is a revelation that God is in us, suffering with us, through us, as us. But you can't know this without getting up on your cross and seeing for yourself. To see as God sees is to get up from the foot of the cross, turn around and look out from the cross. From the cross, God sees the world through human eyes. From Jesus' cross, God sees the world through Jesus' eyes. From your cross, God sees the world through your eyes. And I thought, it was an interesting moment, because I was
Mhm.
determined I'm going to find all the answers by doing all the scholarly stuff. And here was something like, well, no, you want to know the truth? Get in touch with, well, what did I need to get in touch with, Heather? What's that about?
Well, I mean, I just love that story because it's a perfect example of like the synchronicity, that Jung would talk about is when you are in touch with this deeper intuition or your inner wisdom and you're following it, stuff like this will pop up where it's a mirror of, this very bizarre active imagination experience happened to you, where you're like, "Oh, that's strange, but there's something intriguing about it." And there's all this symbolism attached to it, you know? And then you read the same thing in my book, which just hearing you describe it, I've had like a similar experience doing EMDR therapy, which is a lot of active imagination thing. But it's not me, and it sounds like this was your experience too. It's not me just thinking up a story, you know? It's a lot more waiting
Yeah.
for something to show you what's next, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So in my experience with that, it's been a lot more patience and trying to still my mind until the next part is illuminated for me.
Mm.
But yeah, to for me, I think that the first half of my life was very oriented towards trying to find some outside authority to affirm for me that I was on the right path or I was seeing things correctly or whatnot. Which, you know, for me that was through church and spiritual authorities or whatever. For you, it sounds like it's been through like scholastic or academic authorities or whatnot. But yeah, this opening to God seeing the world through me is like just this sudden validation and this dignifying thing where when I see something a certain way or care about something or have this idea. I mean, even writing this book, I don't have any pedigree or credentials to write a book like this. I really don't, you know? Like I'm a mom with 3 kids. I grew up in church my whole life. I've done video production, you know. I don't even when I was asking for endorsements, you know, I sent it over to David Bentley Hart and I think I told him, I'm like, I have nothing in terms of career credentials that would make you excited to read this. Just here's what happened, and I think it'll be worth your time, you know? And then, yeah, I end up talking to like wonderful people like you and having him write wonderful endorsements. Where, yeah, it's just this essential like permission to put myself on the map. And I don't mean this like in a narcissistic way, you know. It's almost like anything you say can be the utmost wisdom or something that's used like, you know, to be narcissistic or whatever, but that, you know, be yourself or follow your own path or whatever. If someone's doing, I think that you have to do the work to differentiate between the true and false self or the ego and your essence and determine like um if you are on your true path versus having an ego trip, you know?
Mm.
Um, but yeah, the times where I've felt aligned with that inner wisdom and followed it, I feel like that life has kind of opened up. So anyway, I mean, to your story, I'm just like nodding, like, yes, you know? So
Mm.
for me, it's been a lot of like the courage to put aside some of the studying
Mm.
and just coming back into like the like Jonah and the whale, you know, he gets spit back up onto the shore. It's just like, all right, well, now you're back in life now. You know, you've taken this whole hero's journey. You've gone down, you know, into the mystical realm, gotten some of that like vital life wisdom, and now you're just thrown up back into your regular life, you know? So for me, it was like, well, I'm back here, you know, putting my kids on the school bus and, you know, got to do my, it was just, all felt very ordinary, you know, but I'm bringing this new perspective into the ordinary world. So, you know, there's lots of other myths like the Holy Grail or the, you know, the knight that has to like leave and go slay the dragon so that he can bring back the elixir to, you know, save the kingdom that's withering away kind of thing is, you know, kind of asking myself, like, what do I love? What do I care about? You know, what wisdom do I have to like share with my world and my context? Like, how do I connect with and communicate with my people? So for me, it was interesting, you know, kind of leaving evangelicalism, but still finding myself in a very evangelical context and going, I still want to connect with these people. You know, I still love these people. So I don't just want to wave bye-bye, you know, it's how do I connect? How do I bring something richer? How do I talk to people in a way that's not going to just trigger all their defenses, you know? And all that stuff is fun to me. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
I enjoy the challenge of figuring out how to communicate with people and remove the hurdles. Not everyone does, but I like that. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no, it was interesting about the where to take to, you know, that where's that authority coming from. Mm-hmm. Well, Heather, I felt like I've had some spiritual counseling from you today, so it's been helpful.
Good. Well, thank you for having me. It's been fun talking.
Yeah, no, it's been really interesting, and I think the book has just kind of, like I say, a synchronicity. I think it's kind of, for me, kind of waiting for the next steps, what opens up from here, you know, because yeah, I don't know what it all means. But yeah, it's yeah, next chapter to unfold.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. Is there anything else you want to say before we finish? That you know, anything else in the pipeline that you want to draw people's attention to, or
Well, I'll just hold
aside
this
from
up
the
again.
usual
Yeah.
things of where to get the book, you know, and obviously,
This is Returning to Eden by Heather Hamilton. You can get it on Amazon or at your local bookstore or wherever. I also have a newsletter called Unorthodox. I send out once a month, and you can just go to returningtoeden.com to sign up for that. And if people want to find me on social media, it's Heather Hamilton 1 on Instagram, or on Facebook, you can look up Heather Hamilton author. So, and those links are on my website at returningtoeden.com too.
great. And I'll put them in the onto the comments, or
Yeah.
above the comments, wherever it goes on Facebook. I can't remember.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Cool. Okay, well, we'll chat at the end of the recording for a second, and yeah, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.